let's start it off. Ladies and gentlemen, today's lecture is going to be why we should not hate book to movie adaptations so much, diba? So we know what they are. We've seen them all around. So let's talk about them because there is a lot of hate, there is a lot of grief that is being thrown at book to film adaptations. So let's go to the very beginning. Let's understand first what is going on here. So let's talk about cinema first. Let's understand the nature of what cinema is, what film is. Okay? Cinema is actually it's the seventh art, sabi nga nila, diba? The seventh fine art. But it is also the youngest. It is the one that only came up in the past, what's it now? Mathematic math. It's about 140 years old. Approximately 130 something years old pa lang yung cinema compared to dance and architecture and all of that. But it is actually a conglomeration and an assimilation of all of the six other types of art. Cinema, for instance, is a lot about theater. It is theatrics, it is dialogue, it is dramatics, it is acting, it is performance, it is staging, it is creating realities. So this is basically cinema is theater evolved, diba? Nagpalit. Um, it's also music. Cinema is music. From the very first versions of cinema, there has always been some sort of sound element that has been involved with it, whether it was live sound that was played in the theaters during screenings, or eventually talkies and recorded music and all of that. And and now we have musicals, and now we have all of these films that are dependent on soundtrack. So cinema is a lot of music as well. And of course, we look at dance, and it's not just about the dance films, right? It's not just about the dance films. It's also uh, about movement. Dance is about movement, and we see where film, because of its created and non-live nature, where movements can be choreographed, blocking can be choreographed. Specific points and looks of an eye are all choreographed and set by the director. So yes, it is like dance. It is movement. And of course, we're talking about visual art as well when we're talking about cinema. And we see this in its most fundamental sense, composition, balance, uh, concepts of mise-en-scène, color harmonies and color theories and contrasts. And we see it as well in how everything comes together, where so many films are literally like paintings, or where cinematographers try to create films that look like works of art in themselves, just in the shot alone. And of course, there's architecture. So, okay, yeah, we build sets, but it's not just about building sets. Architecture is about structure, and cinema is about structure. It's about beginning, middle, and end. It's about setting climaxes and setting denouement. It's about setting up your audiences to expect something and to go in another direction. And that's architectural in nature. It's structure. It's building things. You build suspense. You don't roll out suspense. You don't flow with the suspense. You build it. And that can harken back to the concepts of structure and architecture and the use of spaces. And last but not the least, of course, is literature. And literature is about storytelling. It's about taking experiences and capturing it in a form that can be retold. And that's basically what cinema is. It's taking stories from around the world and from around their environment and putting them together in a way that can be told or can be retold. Okay? So going back even further, or just moving forward a little bit, the first films were actually documentary in nature. These were the films by uh, Edison, the films by the Lumiere brothers. They were documentaries. They captured real life events. They captured actualities, and these are nonfiction. They did not have artificial stories. This was all up until about 1896, when the Lumiere brothers started showing, 1897, when they started showing films publicly for the first time in Paris. Okay, but it wasn't long afterwards that early filmmakers started to explore other avenues for using this motion picture medium. So uh, it became very natural, since you didn't really know what to do with the medium just yet. it was very natural. It's a very natural thing for early filmmakers to look to folklore, mythology, books, stories, literature, popular culture as the source of their materials. So it wasn't so much a quest to come up with something original. To say, oh, let's come up with something familiar. Let's use something first. Because they're still studying. They're still trying to figure out what you can do with the medium, not just technically, but also visually, as again, as a communications platform, as a storytelling platform. So as early as 1898, there were already forays into early nonfiction storytelling. Again, by 1897, George Méliès was already going into 1897. Cinderella in 1898 was one of the earliest, if not one of the first, films that took a story from literature and adapted it into film. Okay, so this was by George Albert Smith in 1898. Other samples, of course, that came up was King John in 1899. This was the first Shakespeare ever adapted into film, and it's the life and death of King John. Uh, Director unknown, but these were one of those early films that were created. Again, look at it, 1899. The first original screenplay, the first screenplay that was actually written, okay, not just simply adapted, but written as an adaptation of a book, was Voyage to the Moon by George Méliès in 1902. And this was actually a mashup of two of Jules Verne's um, books, okay, From the Earth to the Moon and Around the Moon. And he put them together and wrote. This was the first screenplay, again, that was written, because it extracted a story and wasn't just a rendition of an existing uh, written theme, written work, like what they did with the Cinderellas and what they did with the Shakespeares. No, uh, Alice Guy, one of the first women directors in 1905, produced Esmeralda from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1831 by Victor Hugo. Now, you have to understand also, ladies and gentlemen, that up to about this point, films were very short. Films would run in the 10, 11-minute range at most for a single film. So these were all excerpts of the story. You wouldn't get the whole Alice in Wonderland. You wouldn't get the whole Hunchback of Notre Dame. You would get just a very specific scene or context. In this case, Esmeralda was the romance between Esmeralda and the captain of the guard. So yun lang yung yung limits of the story. It wasn't about till about almost 10 years later that full length or feature length films that would hit an R would actually come up. In the Philippines, we had our own adaptations as well. The first Filipino film or the first Filipino produced film by Jose Nepomuceno in 1919, whose centennial we celebrated a couple of years ago, and we just kind of were celebrating this month, the Film Industry Month, because of the launch of Dalagang Bukid in September of 1919, was adapted from a zarzuela. Okay, an opera of sorts, a stylized opera, Dalagang Bukid by Hermogenes Ilagan. Other significant adaptations that we can look into, of course, is Ibong Adarna by Vicente Salumbides in 1941, which is adapted from Korido at buhay ng pinagdaanan ng tatlong prinsipeng magkakapatid na anak ni Haring Fernando at ni Reyna Valeriana sa kahariang Berbanya, which is a 16th century Filipino fairy tale. Yes, that is the original title, ladies and gentlemen, of Ibong Adarna. Ibong Adarna is only an excerpt. It is a few chapters of an actually much, much longer story. Of course, we cannot talk about Filipino film adaptations without talking about, of course, our go-to literary pieces, Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo, produced by national artist Jerry De Leon in 1961 and 1962, respectively, which again had some quite a lot of significance, because even if you're saying that this is 60 years after the death of Jose Rizal, no, I mean there were people alive when these films came out that were alive when Jose Rizal was still alive. So we have iconic films in Philippine cinema, which are also part of our literary collection in the country. Maynila sa Mga Kuko ng Liwanag, for instance, in 1975 by Lino Broca, is an adaptation of Sa Mga Kuko ng Liwanag by Edgardo M. Reyes, which was written in 1968 lang. Diba? So ganun ka-recent. It was a contemporary novel already at the time. Later on, of course, again, other iconic and usually required reading for Philippine schools, Dekada 70. This one by Luwalhati Bautista, also 1983, of course, produced in 2002 by Chito Ronyo, or directed by Chito Ronyo much later. But again, contemporary literature from the Philippines, from Filipino authors, and then these were produced into films. And there are also a lot of mga required readings, required classroom novels that were produced in abroad and in Hollywood as well. So I mean, very very important, for instance, or a major piece, both cinematically and in literature for the U.S. as far as the U.S. Culture is concerned, the American culture is concerned, is Robert Mulligan's To Kill a Mockingbird. Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird is required reading pretty much. It's one of their most essential novels that they have to read, type of thing in their schools and setting, in their popular culture. And the film was an incredibly successful and a very good rendition of that novel, and it became just as important as part of the study of To Kill a Mockingbird. And these pieces of American literature also made their way. For instance, Hihintayin Kita sa Langit by Carlos Seguin Reyna in 1991 is actually an adaptation, a Filipinization, so somewhat an adaptation of Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Fast forward, did we forget Filipino authors later on? No, we did not. Okay, we have the highly successful and critically acclaimed Smaller and Smaller Circles by Raya Martin in 2017, which is adapted from Smaller Circles by F.H. Batacan, which was written in 2002. Now, these book-to-film adaptations, as we said, have become avenues as well to bring into consciousness not just the stories that were written by authors, but the stories that are hidden in society, literally hidden, or stories that would not have otherwise made them into the mainstream consciousness of people. For instance, Hidden Figures. Oh, this is Hidden Figures was not written by John Chu. That's a typo. Was not directed by John Chu. But anyway, Hidden Figures was adapted from the book Hidden Figures, and became an avenue, became a platform to show to the mainstream. When I say show to the mainstream, to the mass audiences, people that have not picked up the book, or people don't even know about the book, or people that read, that don't even know how to read anymore. It not just brought to the fore and the importance of women, Black women, in fact, but in fact put them on the level of intellectuality. It wasn't anymore just The Color Purple, or talking about The Help, for instance, where you're talking about emancipation and women empowerment and Black woman empowerment. This was now Black woman empowerment on an intellectual level, which was, yet another step forward in the arguments and in the struggle for women, for race, for even intellectuals, diba? Kasi films like this celebrated intelligence, and films like Hidden Figures was instrumental for things like that, diba? And then films also became an avenue for race and mainstreaming. For the past 50 years or so, Black America has been able to really politicize and fight for its struggle. But Asian America, Asian culture has really had a difficult time pushing through. In fact, there's Asian hate today, diba? Ironically, also perpetrated by the same people who used to be hated before, but that's a different issue. But the mainstreaming, the Hollywoodization of very distinctly Asian works, such as, for example, Crazy Rich Asians, which was not just written by Asians and directed by Asians and starring Asians, brings Asian culture, Asianness, Asian stories to a wider global audience, So this brings that in and brings us to the fore as Asians. Even if it's not Filipino, even if it's not distinctly Chinese, even if it's not distinctly Singaporean either, there is that. Okay? There are, of course, graphic novels like Coraline, for instance, that came from a graphic novel and was turned into a film by Tim Burton. Locally, one of our more progressive and world-changing comic book adaptations, graphic novel adaptations, is Jaja Zaturna, diba, created by Carlo Vergara, and there's of course Jaja Saturna create also a play, and 90s pa to yung character na to started it. So, but it's been a long journey for Jaja Saturna to come into the mainstream. But again, that turns into an avenue, not just for Filipino authors, Filipino comic book illustrators, Filipino writers and all of that, but also for the Filipino LGBT community. It is a step, yet always another step. There is always a struggle against, um, you know, the mainstreaming of and flattening, the homogenizing of culture, diba? So it's films like this, it's works like this, adaptations like this that just push it one step further, two steps further for the cause. Talking also of pushing things further, we have like the recent success of Trece. Again, a cult favorite, a pop culture favorite from the comic book industry. Trece has a huge following among comic book fans, but that was basically it. But getting picked up by Netflix, being put on an international stage, not just introduces Filipino animation to the world, it also introduces Filipino mythology, Filipino culture, Filipino writers, Filipino stories on that global stage, and that again opens doors, gives us more steps to take, and of course, when we talk about book adaptations, we cannot forget and we cannot discount these these bestsellers, these mainstream novels that that were converted into film, that helped define a whole industry, and it helped define uh, the genre, in fact, and all of that. Let's understand the impact of literature in film adaptations. No? Uh, Adaptations, ladies and gentlemen, make up over 50% of all Hollywood films ever made. In fact, the number is about 53 on the average, 53% um, of sales. In fact, on a year-to-year basis, mababa na ang 50%. It has gone up, I think it was 2019 or 2016, when the percentage of book adaptations that were released by Hollywood alone was 65% of that. So you can imagine I mean, more than half the films that are actually book to film adaptations. Also, film adaptations have usually gross 53% more worldwide than films from original screenplays. So when you have numbers like that, you really can't blame producers for looking to books as sources of their materials, looking to short stories, looking to articles and all that as source of materials, because, well, 53% more is kind of hard to compete with. Diba? But we're here to really ask the question, why do we hate book adaptations so much? I mean, why is there so much grief? Why is there so much hate that is thrown every time we see, hoy, they're going to be making a film of this. And you're like, oh, please don't ruin it, don't ruin it, don't ruin it. And these are the usual reactions that we get, diba? We get things like, they're missing characters. There's a character that you fell in love with in the book, and suddenly that person is not there. And then there's the wording, because in the book it's so perfect, it works. Oh, there's a ganda na pagkasabi and all of that, and then suddenly, it's like, why is it like that? Why did they say it wrong? Or why the words wrong? Why it's not the same. The words are mixed up. It doesn't work that way. So and then you start saying, the characters, the timeline, the situations are not faithful to the book. So you're like, I'm here to watch something that I read, and then suddenly it doesn't look like that at all. It's not the same as the book. That's a problem. Well, the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, is because they're different. The books and the films are different. And the reason why there is hate or we dislike is because they did not make them the way that we thought that they would be. The films did not match our expectations, did not bring our book to life. What do I mean by that? Bringing our book to life. Okay. Why do you like books? First of all, books have all the time in the world. The magic of books is the story that you're reading now, you can close that, put it aside, and pick it up 20 years later, and it'll be the exact same story that it was. And because books have time and books are able to, to stretch time, they can take their time to be deep, to be rich, to describe to you what's going on in absolute detail. Case in point, for example, the Game of Thrones series. For those that have seen the Game of Thrones books, they're pretty thick. All of them are pretty thick. But aside from all of the killing and the sex involved in Game of Thrones, the author, George R. R. Martin, spends actually a great amount of time describing food and fabric. He describes clothing with so much detail. Yes, that helps people visualize and understand what's going on. But imagine the time that it takes to do that. And that eats pages, that adds to the magic, because you can have the same kind of unbathed European books, slash and kill books, diba, that don't do that, and the experience is different. It becomes a very different experience. The world becomes a very different place when you read them in two different ways. So you books can take the time to do that. And books also, ladies and gentlemen, create worlds that only you can imagine. A book is personal. It's incredibly personal. Even if you narrate a book to a child, that story that he or she is listening to is personal to him or her, because the visuals that come up in your mind are uniquely yours. Only you, when you're reading that, know exactly how Harry Potter looks, how the Targaryens look, how King's Landing looks. It's you. You and the book, you and the story. And how big or how small or how grand that world is yours and yours alone. Now, let's go to the other end of the spectrum. Why do we like films? Yan, di ba? Why do we like films? Di ba? What is it about films that we actually kind of like? You see, films are immersive. Films, movies, are designed for you to sit in a dark room looking at just one screen and forgetting everybody else around you. And things like surround sound, uh, Dolby, all of those things enhance that experience. Fancy seats, Directors Club just enhance that experience. It's you, the seat, the screen, and the film, and nothing else in the world. And nothing else really captures that kind of immersive magic the way film can. To bring you into that world, to show you, and just you, everything that is going on and everything is happening right in front of you. Also, and this is probably the most fundamental thing that really became the magic of movie making, is that film moves. Film, which is almost unique to any other art form, is the fact that it moves. And it doesn't just move. It can move the same way over and over and over and over again. Theater moves, dance moves, but they're performed, which means that if you want to see the exact same thing again, it has to be recorded. But film moves. And film moves in ways that people cannot move. Film moves stories the way that words cannot. Film gives us perspectives that only birds and gods have. It changes how we see the world. It moves us emotionally, but it also moves us physically because of that moving picture, because of what it can do. That's the magic of cinema. And last, film makes the magic real. And that was the resounding success of films like Harry Potter. The books Harry Potter, the series Harry Potter, took the world by storm because of the magic that was created in the hearts and the minds of its readers. And the hopes and dreams of every reader, of every Harry Potter fan, was when you turn it into a film, please don't screw it up, please don't screw it up, because it was all about the magic. And yes, when the first films came out, the magic was just unreal. It made it real. It was everything we had hoped it to be and more. And film, only film can do that. Ladies and gents, can we try not to hate so much on film adaptations? Because film adaptations, ladies and gentlemen, we can look at it from the context of connections and how it connects the paper book to what we see in the cinemas. That they connect the stories, they connect the characters, they connect events to the real world. They make magic real. They bring things together. These adaptations visualize. Again, once upon a time, people had their own impressions of what Harry Potter looked like. And then one day, bam, we know who Harry Potter looks like. We know who Hermione looks like. We know what hobbits look like. We all know because it was all visualized. We can also look at these film adaptations as interpretations of making real a world that really did not exist except in our head. Case in point is World War Z. If you had a chance to read World War Z, the book, and World War Z, the movie, have almost nothing in common, except for the fact that there are zombies. World War Z, the book, is actually written as parang interviews of different people. The story moves forward, but it is through the testimonials of different people, of where it started, how it began, what happened in this place, what happened in that place, and that's what moves the story forward. Meanwhile, World War Z is essentially the story of only one of those interviews, and the interview doesn't even exist in the book. But are they faithful to each other? Pretty much. Are they the same? No, they're not. But are they both as valuable as products of popular culture? Yes, they are. And they're both valid and they're both incredibly entertaining. They both, ladies and gentlemen, create a world that we all can believe in. Let's look at now the concept of transmedia storytelling. Okay? Um, it's an evolution already of the way stories are being told and the way that we see and perceive stories today. Transmedia storytelling is defined as telling a single story or story experience. Again, that magic word, experience, across multiple platforms and formats using current digital technologies, which basically means that you're able to tell, or you would be able to tell, aspects of a story or the experience using whatever medium is available. And the reason why I'm using Star Wars as a backdrop right now is exactly because Star Wars is the canon for transmedia storytelling. How the stories have evolved and continue to evolve across media. There is fan fiction that was written and it's on print. There's fan fiction on digital stories. There are animations. There are Lego films. There are live action series. There are comic books. All of them are linked. And not even all of them were owned by Disney. These things started, transmedia storytelling as a phenomenon for Star Wars, started long before Disney bought the Star Wars franchise from Lucasfilms. It came out in the toys. It came out in the merchandise. It came out in spin-offs. And that's the magic and that's the potential that we have today. How stories are evolving and how they can change. You do not have to repeat the single story, but always over and over again because it can now change. And it becomes a bigger and better argument for book to film adaptations, especially nowadays when the term film has become very blurred compared to TV. In fact, TV has almost ceased to exist other than an appliance. Diba? So as we blur definitions, transmedia storytelling might be that direction to go. Let's look at this in a more concrete sense. Okay, you guys ought to be familiar with Sleeping Beauty. Okay, and this was written in the hundreds of years ago by the Grimm brothers, right? So this is a story, and in the 1930s, adapted into film, into an animation by the Walt Disney Company with Sleeping Beauty that most of us have actually become familiar with, right? Or the iconography of Sleeping Beauty, which has then moved on in the 2000s, okay, with the creation and the birth of the characterization or the live action film Maleficent. So this is a transformation. You notice it went from a written book by the Grimm brothers into an animated film and then moved into a, a live action film format. And then something else happened. It went from live action and actually rotated back, cycled back into books. Because I was walking one day at Fully Booked and suddenly it's like, whoa, what is this? I saw it on display there, The Mistress of Evil. And this became now spun from the story of Maleficent in the film and converted now into the story of Maleficent, Mistress of Evil in the book. Bumalik sa pagiging libro from a film became a book adaptation. All that. And now we increase or we expand. Remember, it is a story experience in transmedia storytelling, which means that it wasn't just Mistress of All Evil. It also became now a series of the Disney villains. And that's a magic of transmedia storytelling, or understanding the power and potential of transmedia storytelling. And that, ladies and gentlemen, it's that let's not be fixated on form and the supremacy of one form over other, but rather that they can evolve and they should evolve and they're part of an evolution, an ecosystem where one can evolve into the other and make one better or worse, or transform back to its quote unquote original form. But it's not an original form, this is new. These are original form. This is original. The books are original. The original form was Maleficent. The original form was Ursula and all of that. So what I'm saying is maybe, just maybe, we can look together and understand that they're different, but they're actually part of the same thing. Same ika nga, pero different. You see, ladies and gents, as I wrap up, there's still something about books that you cannot ignore. You know, when they say that the older the book, the better the smell, that is so true. There's something magical about flipping a page. There's something about that word. There's a permanency in that word on the page that we can never change. Permanent. As I said, that story will never change. The experience may change for you, but the story itself never changes. The older the book, ladies and gents, the better the smell. But ultimately, books can't do this. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was my favorite sex scene in all of cinema. Yeah, that's from the movie Red Violin. Okay, and that was a sex scene. And you just really can't get that except in a film. Because it wasn't just the music. It was everything else. It was where the camera moving around. It was the nature, the immersion. It's the reactions of the audience, the tempo, the beats, all of that. So, with that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The floor is now.